Welcome back to the show. Now, over these last few weeks, many different institutions have had to scramble to come up with new policies on the fly. High schools are no different. I would say that among the dozen or so juniors I'm working with right now, I've heard of about a dozen different approaches to grading for this spring. Joining me to help unpack some of the details is my old pal, Tova Tolman. Hey, Tova, welcome to the show.
Old pal. Thanks, Ian.
My old pal. Yeah, I was trying to think of an adjective to describe you, but
I
anyway,
like
it's
it.
great to be able to see you today. And that's a good reminder for our listeners that they can always navigate to our Facebook page, facebook.com/collegecoach, if they want to see the faces behind the voices. Okay, Tova, pass fail. Seems simple. Is it?
Ooh, I felt like you were asking me a trick question, like
Yeah,
true, false, pass, fail. It is pretty simple. You either pass the course or you fail the course. Is
that's
this a
right.
trick question? Simple.
Well, it's a
Yeah.
simple concept, right?
Yep.
But I think that when we are used to grades, courses, all of these things sort of coming together when it comes to the college admission process, there are certainly big questions when we have something that disrupts it like this. So let's just sort of start with some common approaches that we're seeing schools take. Describe a little bit about what it means for a school to go pass fail in this context
Sure.
and why they might be doing it.
Well, there's a little crazy thing going on right now. I don't know if you've heard. A lot of students
Okay, yeah,
have switched to online learning, right? So they're home. They're not in school. They're not with their teachers. They don't have their normal resources. They don't have their labs. They don't have maybe half the facilities that the school has. And the schools are trying to recognize and acknowledge that these students are working with fewer resources, fewer tools in their tool belts, and it perhaps would be unfair to expect students to maintain the same level of performance. And maybe if we removed the severe grading scale of A versus A minus versus B plus versus B, and we just said, hey, just get your work done and don't focus on the grade, but just be present. And we took grades out of the picture, maybe there's a little less stress, a little less anxiety for these students. So I think probably the most common approach I've seen for schools, although you're right, 12 students, 12 different
yeah,
variations,
yeah.
is some version of an abnormal grading scale for the second semester of junior year or whatever year they're in right now.
Right. And I think that's probably the most common approach I've seen is just schools saying wholesale, this semester is going to be pass fail. But there are some other sort of funky policies. I talked to a student yesterday in Massachusetts who said that his first quarter was going to be pass fail, but then the second quarter, if they did all their work, they would get an A. And if
Okay.
they didn't turn in like one assignment, they would get a pass. And then there was like a fail. And I was like, that sounds great. That's really
Okay.
easy.
Sure.
There's also, we've heard of some A versus incomplete dichotomies where it's like you either get an A or you get an incomplete for the class.
Sure.
Is it important for students to understand how their specific high school's policy is going to be interpreted at the schools they choose to apply? Or is that something that ultimately gets shouldered by their high school guidance counseling office when they advocate for the student in the application?
The latter. And the guidance counselors here are doing just that. They are working to make sure that they are advocating for these students, setting them up for success, and really making sure that the colleges will understand what choices they made and what options the students had. I would spend less energy worrying what the colleges will think or see or understand, and more energy thinking about how can I engage in my schoolwork in this new and exciting way.
That's right. That's right. Now, but there are some cases where we are seeing that students have choices, right? So
Yeah.
if you're sort of in just a situation where it's pass fail and you have no control over it, I think it's something that you shouldn't worry about.
Nope.
You can't worry about it. Let's just let it go. But there are some situations where school districts are saying, hey, would you rather have a grade or take pass fail, and leaving it up to the students? How does a student go about making a decision in that kind of situation?
Sure. I would talk to your guidance counselor, see what advice they have for you. I think a broad generalization you might want to try and apply is if you have been doing pretty well thus far. Let's say you've been maintaining an A to the point where the disruption began, and you get a pass after that. The colleges are going to assume you continued at the level you were at. Let's say you were on an upward trend, though, and the second semester was going so much better for you. You started out maybe with a C, and you were steadily working with your teacher, working to improve, working to better your grade. And now all of a sudden, when you could have turned that C into an A, you don't have that opportunity to. In that situation, I'd ask for the grade for sure, because this is your opportunity to improve, to show that upward trend, to show that resiliency in this very difficult time.
Right.
And if you have the option, if you can be bettering your situation, take advantage of it.
Yeah, you really want to look at the full spectrum of what your high school performance has been to date, and then sort of look at, does this help me? I was in sort of a really interesting situation with a student I'm working with in California, and he was very concerned about his school going pass fail, but he'd had all A's up until this semester. And when we actually did the GPA calculation, we found that if he had received grades this semester, his GPA would have been lower, even if they were all A's, than if he had not received grades, just because of the nature of the UC GPA calculation and the bonus points. So it was this very funky scenario where it's like, actually, this won't help you because your bonus points have already been fully allocated to the other areas. So, I think that students often will get caught up in thinking about my GPA, the 10th place, these decimal points, I'm a 4.4 or a 4.3. I'm a 3.7 or a 3.8, and those things are not particularly meaningful to college admission offices. They really want to see more about the full spectrum of what students have to report in terms of their performance. And so one of our colleagues actually was participating yesterday in a webinar with the coalition, right? And there were a number of different schools that were participating here, admissions officers from those schools, and they weighed in on some of these important questions that families have. I think most of their perspective was pretty comforting for a student who might be concerned. Any highlights that you want to share from schools from that webinar yesterday?
The main piece that wasn't a direct quote from any of them that I took away was, we get it. This is not a normal situation, and you are in the same boat as everyone else. Do not panic. Do not freak out. Your guidance counselors will be communicating with us. We are never reviewing your transcripts in a vacuum. Your GPA is never a vacuum. All of this is going to be considered and taken holistically. That was kind of the main theme that I got.
So that wasn't a direct quote? That was just ad-libbed.
No.
Okay, gotcha. Anything in particular that we saw? I mean, I think you shared a couple of with me schools saying that students are not going to be disadvantaged.
I think most directly, when students will not be disadvantaged, Rutgers, students will not be disadvantaged by pass-fail grades. This whole experience is completely outside of their control. High schools are scrambling. I'm not sure if that was paraphrased.
Yeah, and we got an email from the admissions director at the University of Oregon, who said that pass-fail grades were not going to impact students, but they would be looking carefully at scenarios where it was incomplete, because they didn't want to take that A into the account of the GPA for just that set of schools, because they thought that might be unfair for students who did not have the A incomplete dichotomy. What about 12th graders? So, we're sort of talking in the context of 11th graders, especially 10th graders, 9th graders. What about 12th graders who are graduating and they're worried about schools not accepting these final grades in order for them to be eligible to enroll in the fall?
I actually think a lot of schools have a site on their page already dedicated to this content. If you're an admitted student and you go to your school's enrolling student, admitted student info page, I was just chatting with admission officers at Fordham University yesterday, and they have a whole page on their enrolling student site dedicated to explaining and showing what we will do with your pass-fail grades. How do you get us your final transcript, working with students in that. At yesterday's webinar that our colleague attended, Middlebury also said something to that effect of, we have faith in our schools and the school districts that they are working incredibly hard on behalf of these students to make sure that they are graduating and finishing. They are going to work with students with these pass-fail grades, with completing different requirements. And again, these are unprecedented times, and we're all looking to sort of help these students successfully persist forward. And no one is going to be looking to sort of disadvantage these students in any way, shape, or form.
So we're really focused here on sort of the output of this process, right? You look at a transcript, you've got A's and B's traditionally for the first couple of years, then you've got this sort of period of pass-fail. And we don't know how long this period may be. I think that it's very likely that schools, if they have to remain closed in the fall, are going to figure out a way to return to grades. They'll have more lead time, they'll have more of a heads up. they'll figure that out. One of the things that we're not talking about, though, is what this means from a student's perspective. So, if I'm in a position where I am now taking all of my classes pass fail, how do I approach my classes? Do I think about my learning in a different way? Do I think about my assignments in a different way? Do I allow myself to take my foot off the gas in some ways? I mean, what would be your advice for students here, both in terms of the right thing to do, but also the most high utility thing for them to do if they're thinking about the college admission process, especially?
I think this is an opportunity to remember the end game goal here. And a student listening might say that that's not my end game goal, but the larger end game goal here of to find some sort of love of learning, right? I think that's why we're here. We talk about this in our elementary school curriculum, this idea of intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. In extrinsic motivation, I'm motivated by that A, that teacher holding up the A on the stamp of the page, the A on the report card, woohoo. Ideally, maybe we're working a little bit towards some element of a love of learning, an intellectual curiosity, some sort of academic thirst, the kind of thing that these colleges are after, right? Yeah. It's not so much that they care about how many A's you have, yes, but why? It's some sort of measure for your desire to master material, your curiosity, your desire to learn. Yeah. If you're no longer going to be driven solely by the grade, maybe this is an opportunity to re-engage with the material in a way that excites you. Maybe you can not focus on that one little piece of the requirement, but dive in more completely to the piece that gets you really excited. And maybe that will spark a little bit more curiosity, a little bit more enthusiasm for the love of the learning.
I think that's good. That's a good intrinsic argument. That works for me. I love intrinsic motivation.
I didn't know that question was coming.
But it doesn't work. It doesn't work for everyone, right? And I think that even those who are considering this from an extrinsic standpoint, you can say, look, if you're a junior, that teacher who you're now taking a class from online is still going to write your letter of recommendation.
That's right.
And that teacher is going to notice that ever since you moved to online learning, you have not been as communicative. You have not been turning in your homework on time. You have not been connecting. And as soon as that pass-fail announcement came, you took your foot off the gas. And that, if that's going to be somebody who has to advocate on your behalf, I think that you want to make sure that you're still putting your best foot forward. There are also I would say that there is this building process. If you're a 9th or a 10th grader, you need to understand the content that you're learning right now to be able to be in a position to be successful next year, right? So if you sort of slack off in pre-calc because it's pass-fail, then when you take calculus next year, it's going to be a struggle.
You're going to be in trouble.
You're going to be in deep trouble. I would be in trouble taking calculus no matter what. But I think for a lot of students, that could be a real challenge, right? Absolutely. So some good things I think to keep in mind for students who might be saying, pass, fail, whatever, I'm going to pass. So let's look further on down the road. Are there any final tips, any other things that we pulled out of that webinar yesterday, or other things that you would want to share with families who are looking at pass-fail and are concerned about this change?
I think for the younger students who are just starting out in high school, 9th, 10th graders, that upward trend, that 4-year trend is always something that colleges are considering. So fret not. This is a break. You still have a lot of high school on the back end. And those later grades will just become that much more important and in a maybe exciting way. So like you said, use this time to build.
Yeah.
And I think the main piece that I just heard again and again from everyone that I speak with on the college side and that we heard from yesterday is don't stress. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, hard not to, but I think that's the best advice. There might be some more emphasis on other aspects of your high school career, but for now, let's try and not stress and keep things as easy as possible. All right, Tova, for that segment, I will give you a grade of pass.
I was really worried I was going to fail, or at least not get an incomplete. This feels good. Thank you for that.
Definitely completed. So thanks for coming on the show. Always a pleasure.
Always.
And for doing such detailed research in advance as well.
Sure thing. Bye.
All right, for our final segment, we will be talking finance with a keen eye on how you can fund your college experience beyond your financial aid awards. So don't go away.